Representing with you today. So welcome back.
Good morning and thank you, Janet. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Janet.
And on this very beautiful morning, we began with a very beautiful song that says, "We walk this earth as one." And how perfect it is, because my little talk this morning is on consciousness and how consciousness really does unite us all as one. And yet consciousness does divide us all too, doesn't it? This morning, this beautiful morning, which was very cold, was so different from yesterday. Yesterday was warm, and it was spring, and it was actually summer. And so each one of us this morning, in our own little individual cuddly warm beds, had to decide to get up and get dressed and maybe take a cold shower and get in a cold car and drive on a highway to get here. And I give you thanks for that. But that was a personal decision, and that was personal consciousness. I didn't decide who was going to come. You decided, and that's your personal freedom. So that's a consciousness that's separated, and I think we can all understand that. And a consciousness that, apart from Descartes, don't look down at me, Descartes, don't bring me. He separated mind and body for a very logical reason. You know, he really didn't want to be imprisoned by a church at the time that didn't like the idea that science was crawling in and perhaps contradicting some of the dictates of religion. So it was very easy for him to say, spirit, consciousness, everything is over here, body and physical is over there. Well, as a physiologist, I certainly know that we can't really do that, because each one of us in our own beds could have said, we want to get up this morning. But what has to get up? The body. And that means the body has to be able to be in service to the mind. You had to have your brain stem completely intact so that you could put your feet outside the bed. You could walk across the floor. You could be aware of your room so that you don't bang into a wall. You could see, hear, feel, and know everything around you. So that consciousness, that awareness, was a connection of mind and body working in concert with one another. This is the consciousness that rat behavioral biologists and psychologists would say is consciousness, period. I'm not a rat behaviorist biologist. That is one of the ways that we can look at consciousness. That's not the only way. And so I'd like to go back and give you a little story, a short little biography of an individual who in the 19th century seems to have the same kind of background that I have, except he was a genius and he was brilliant. His name was William James. Has anyone ever heard of him? You've probably heard of Henry James. Henry James is a great novelist and wrote wonderful books. And the entire James family really were filled with talents. The father, William James Sr., was a Swedenborgian, so we know where that comes from. But William, as a young child, had physical problems. He had ailments of the stomach and the intestines, things today that I look at as basically irritable bowel syndrome or whatever. He was a nervous child. But the one thing that really strikes me is he had eye problems. It is our senses, our physical senses, that connect us to the world. And so this brilliant genius, who was going to be known for history as, you know, writing one of the first psychology books, and actually that was the first psychology book he ever read, and he wrote it. He was a genius, and his eyes, yes, were looking outwards, but that's not where the clear vision was. The clear vision was inside. And one of the things that he gave us was an understanding of consciousness. He described consciousness as though it's a huge room with a gigantic chandelier in the very center. And most of us stand underneath that huge chandelier. We see what's in front of our eyes. We hear what comes into our ears. We feel the physical reality around us. And yet so much is happening at the periphery, at that part of consciousness that we may not understand too well. Well, William ended up going to Harvard and getting a medical degree, but he never practiced medicine. He didn't want to be a body mechanic, I assume, which is a comment that I made when I got my doctoral thesis done, and everyone said, another few years you can get an MD. Didn't want to be a body mechanic. I wanted to be the person who told them what to do. I didn't want to just follow what I was being told. Neither did William James. And what he ended up doing was he took a trip down to the Amazon. And you can imagine, this is the 1800s, because he was interested in ecology. We begin this morning, Mother Earth, we're all one. He was interested in ecology. But diseases of the stomach are not so good to one that's going down in the Amazon. He ended up with smallpox, and he ended up having to go back to Harvard. But he was still interested in philosophy and psychology. So what does he do? He ends up with an eye problem, going and studying art. He's interested in seeing what it is in consciousness, in waking reality, but what it is that goes beyond. I could go on with his history, but for us here in the Spiritualist Church, what's important to know, he was one of the founding fathers of the American Psychical Society. This man who had this brilliant background, who taught, by the way, anatomy and physiology, which was kind of my first persona, he went beyond it and said, there is something more. And those of you who know some of the history of spiritualism know that he also worked with a psychic. He lost a child, and he ended up having great medium meetings, which are well known. And of course he said, well, the area of consciousness and what we know would say all ravens are black. I have a white raven, because he was able to get messages from the beyond. But his beliefs were not so solid in the chandelier in the middle that they dismissed everything else, nor were they so strong in what was on the outside that he was able to categorize it and quantify it. When I did my doctoral thesis, it was on altered states of consciousness. The only one that I did not get involved in was drug therapies. I didn't take ayahuasca, I didn't take mescaline, I wasn't interested in LSD. I was interested in the experiences, but I felt we are all one, that somehow those experiences were in us anyway. And it has certainly been shown that individuals that have the ability to shift their consciousness and see more, have more opiates endogenously in their body. And that when they shift consciousness, this is like a connection beyond to the divine. As I can move with my story, I can say to each and every one of you that certainly William James studied theosophy. Anyone who knows Madame Blavatsky, they were interested in truth. And when it comes to consciousness, there's one truth that harkens back to ancient Egypt. The ancient Egyptians would have looked at us as having what we call the ego. This is the you and I who decided to get out of bed this morning while all those empty seats are those people cuddled underneath their nice little bodies. Don't be jealous of them, you know. Maybe there's bed bugs biting them or whatever. But the fact is, that's our ego. And the Egyptians didn't use that term. But they knew that what walked upon the earth was some sort of connection, consciously, to everything they had to do on the earth, to tend the fields and watch the Nile and the rising of the sun. And of course they gave us the background to our 365-day calendar. So they understood all that, but they understood something beyond. And that was the Ka. In many of the images in the books of the afterlife, and as well as on the tombs, you'll see pictures of what look like twins. And they always talk about these twins. And I look and say, well, you know what that is? It's the ego me, who is blinded by waking physical reality and thinks, this is it. I lose somebody I love, and it's like, this is it. I'm here alone, they're gone, or whatever. And then there's my twin, who's far more intelligent than I am, because they are the one, like we talked about this morning, that's eternally connected to the divine. The one that knows the truth, this twin. Now, certainly in the psychology of Carl Jung, he would call this a connection with the unconscious, which to waking reality and my ego really is unconscious. But how do we get connected with it? With altered states of consciousness. Here we are with William James and a gigantic chandelier that shows us the room and everything in it, but there's this periphery of the softened vision. When we're getting ready to go to sleep at night, we're often in a state where our mind wanders and we start seeing things. We call this hypnagogia. It is the entrance into this place of sleep. And it's a very important place. Another favorite of mine in history is the father of modern organic chemistry. His name was Kekule. And he was studying a particular molecule with his rational mind and with everything that the rational mind was fed. He couldn't come to an answer. So he sat before his fire and decided he was just going to take some time off. And he started to go into the hypnagogic state. Suddenly, that molecule was dancing, ring around the rosy. He woke up, eureka, and said, "My God, that's what benzene looks like." Father of modern organic chemistry. Did he get this in waking reality? Did he get it because we quantified and qualified everything that we see in front of our eyes? Absolutely not. Because although this desk looks firm and real, I know from my study of chemistry that, physics, these are all molecules that are racing around. And given the right conditions, this lectern can get up by itself. And I know that. Does it happen often? No. But I know that it can. So what it looks inanimate, it really isn't. We know that it's reduced to an energy. And so is our mind, and so is the great mystery of the darkness, the mysterious, the hidden, and the eternal. It's part of us. That song, we are all one upon the earth. The fact that consciousness is not limited to everything we feed it. We send children to school now at 6 months old. They're going with their bag of diapers to some person that is not family who's going to watch them until we can send them to a proper school. And they are fed all sorts of information about what the universe is. And yes, it's good. They're learning how to behave. They're learning that there are certain rules and certain things that can be done or not. But the creative mind is not being given much time to see what's beyond the periphery, to play with that twin that we call, the fantastical friend that is actually real. That's a guardian angel. That's a shamanic power animal. And even this word shamanism, that really is an altering of consciousness, entering into another state that gives us information. And I would say connects us to what Jung would call the unconscious or the self. We have a twin, and that twin is eternal, and that twin is connected to the divine and has all the information we need if we would only go into that space. There was, in February 2007, a Time magazine article. It was written by a neurologist, neurosurgeon, up at one of the hospitals in Manhattan. And it was an unbelievable story in his mind. I remember it well because my son died the next month. And this was an amazing tale for me to have read first, coming from a biology background. There's a patient in the hospital. He has a brain tumor. The brain tumor is so large, it has occupied his entire cerebrum. But his brain stem is still intact. And knowing a little bit about the brain, I can tell you the brain stem is what helps your heart to continue to beat, helps you to breathe, helps all of those automatic functions of your body that you don't have to think about. When you got up this morning, you didn't have to remember to breathe. You didn't need to remember to have your heart beat. None of these things. They're automatic. They're involuntary functions. They work. So everything that's up here, we have cognition, we have temporal lobe, hearing, we have the occipital. Believe me, when they say you have eyes in the back of your head, it's the back of your head that translates what goes through the optic chiasma from the eyes. So all of that's gone. This man is occupied by a tumor. And so, yes, he's breathing, but there's going to be no cognition, no eyesight, no anything. His family approaches the doctor, the neurologist, and asks the doctor, can we say goodbye to our father? Is he going to say goodbye to us? And the doctor has to say, no, he's not here anymore. There's no consciousness here. He's not going to be able to say goodbye. The doctor leaves to go home for a weekend, knowing that this patient is going to be dead very, very soon. On Monday, he's back in the hospital, and there's a little nurse making the bed. And the nurse says, I was in the room when Mr. So-and-so passed. And he says, oh, really? We know he was going to pass. She said, he opened his eyes, and he said goodbye to every member of his family. And the doctor looked, that's not possible. Yes, it is possible. Because the mind-body connection of the ego was gone. We don't have the brain there. But the ka, that spiritual part of being, is there, always there. Which is why that person can be passed and can communicate through very talented mediums. That person who's passed can communicate to you, to me. Because that ka is not in service to the body or is not subjective to what the body wants. The ka is eternal. So the song, we are all one, our consciousness is non-local, simply because divinity is non-local. And as one who does spiritual medicine, I will tell you that I can go out and sit by a plant, and that plant has consciousness. And that plant will reveal to me how it can work for a particular person, because that consciousness is divinity. Nothing would exist in this room without divinity. The chandelier that's in the middle of the room, that's what everyone looks at. And interestingly enough, William James is known for pragmatism, and for an idea that sometimes we may believe one thing, sometimes we may believe something else. So he used to say, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, this is what I believe. Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, I believe the opposite. And guess what, on Sunday? I'm not sure what I believe. So just know, consciousness, as I said at the end of my doctoral thesis, look, if you want me to quantify and qualify it, give me a measuring cup. Send me outside to get the temperature. How successful do you think I'm going to be? I'm not. Because you can't quantify and qualify deity, the mother and father of us all. Doesn't fit into any box. So it's not science that we look at for that. It's the feeling inside us that says, you know what, divinity is always with us, whatever name we want to call it. We're not going to measure it. And yes, we have a consciousness that gets us here and allows us to be aware so that we can walk around in the world. And anyone who's had anybody sick, and we know some people that have been sick and ill and in the hospital and their brain's not working perfectly, they can't control their bodily movements yet. And that's one type of consciousness. But that never means that the divine consciousness, that ka, is not there. So I tell you, when you go to sleep at night, pay attention to those dreams. You know, the scientific part of me would say, okay, those are the little remnants of what happened during the day, and you're just shoving them in a box and trying to get rid of them. You know, pack them up and send them off. No. Because the other part of me says, this is the divine voice, this is the ka that says, all right, your ego may want this. This is a better path for you. Learn to look at them, learn to study them. Learn to look not so much at the light, but what's at the periphery. Soften the vision and look inside. So, not the chandelier, the edges. Blessings, may every one of you have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much. Always very, you wake up the philosopher every time. So thank you so much.